And then I guess the other thing we should talk about is his acoustic guitar work, which was also terrific and came in many different flavors. So many great examples. We start with the second half of Led Zeppelin 3, right? And when you talk about acoustic Zeppelin, you're talking about acoustic guitar, but you're also typically talking about these other things that Jimmy would play or John Paul Jones would occasionally play for him, or they do it, together live. There's all, the mandolin. We talked about the Battle of Evermore, right? That's mandolin, right? You've got banjo on things like Gallows Pole, and you get pedal steel on Tangerine. All of these different kinds of instruments, these stringed instruments that Jimmy would have a go on. It's not that he was a master at any one of these things, but he would go and pull out a pedal steel guitar for a certain part on a song. And he'd get, or he'd pull out a banjo, or he'd, get a mandolin or whatever. And again, those kinds of things that created this different sonic texture for Led Zeppelin that gave them this differentiation from Sabbath and Purple and everybody else. You got all of these acoustic instruments working together, and you have songs like, Friends and Brawny Ore and Gallows Pole and, again, Black Mountainside and stuff like that. Some of them in the non-standard tunings that we've talked about. And again, extremely influential on other people, extremely influential on me. I know that I have taken an awful lot of how Jimmy recorded acoustic instruments and used them as, again, sort of different flavors in the sonic canvas of what your track could be. I love recording acoustics. I have done, the blending of acoustic guitar with electric guitar on things like Over the Hills and Far Away. If you listen to that as a mix, what you will hear is there's acoustic 6-string, there's acoustic 12-string, and then there's the electric, and they blend, and he blends it all together, and you get, this sonic difference that if he had played the whole thing on electric, it wouldn't sound anywhere near as rich. So you get, this sound that has a lot of dimension to it.
There's a certain depth through acoustic guitar, and especially a 12-string has like this unique
this chime sparkle on top, right? Yeah. And if you blend that with electric guitar, well, it's magic. It was magic when the Stones did it too. But I mean, that's just a win. And people,
which track did the Stones do it?
Over the Hills and Far Away is a good example because it's
Stones.
On the Stones,
yeah.
The Stones do it on Wild Horses, on Angie, on especially Wild Horses. Angie, I think, stays mostly acoustic, but things like Wild Horses, you're going to hear in that mix. That's a glorious mix. You hear acoustic 12-string, acoustic 6-string, and electric.
Okay.
And that's Jimmy Miller. That's another wonderful producer. But those are the kinds of things that I've taken away from people like Jimmy Miller and Jimmy Page of how to make my tracks sound more lush and dynamic by tracking acoustic guitar with my electric guitar and blending it in some way. I had pulled out a mandolin and learned how to play Battle of Evermore, and then I wrote a mandolin part for a song that I had, just a quick little turnaround in the song. I threw a mandolin over it. I don't know how to play mandolin. I just figured out how to play mandolin enough to play the one part, and it adds this sonic thing to the track that wasn't there before, and it's like it's magic.
And he was the first one to kind of do that.
I think in such a grand way. I mean, you have a guy like Brian Jones in the Rolling Stones was another one of these musicians. You could hand him any instrument and he could play it, whether it was a dulcimer or a xylophone or a sitar or something like that. And the Stones of the 1960s sonically is characterized by Brian Jones adding these wonderful different sounds to these tracks, whether it's sitar on Paint It Black or, xylophone on Under My Thumb and things like that. A lot of these harpsichord on Lady Jane, right? Brian Jones could play anything. And the the Stones of the 70s became a much more just guitar-oriented band, guitars, horns, and piano. But in the 60s, when they were really more experimental and more, trying these Beatlesque ideas of trying to like throw funky things in, Brian Jones was a huge part of the sound, even though he was no part of the writing. But, if you don't have Brian Jones in the 60s, the Stones 60s stuff doesn't have all of those interesting flavors. Jimmy Page, he's doing it all a lot by himself, and then they would get on stage, and of course, John Paul Jones could play these instruments too. So they'd get on stage and play Going to California, and one of them would play the guitar, Jimmy would play the guitar, and John Paul Jones would play the mandolin or whatever. And, it would sound glorious. And again, this goes back to vision and being able to say, I want to have this canvas filled with 64 colors rather than 8 colors. Right. I'm going to use, he was not so much a sitar, but I mean, he would use, like I said, all of these different instruments just to add different flavors to each song. And that's huge as well.
Also, John Paul Jones used some cool instruments on like Trampled Underfoot. He used a clavinet, which is like the same piano that's used on, or piano type instrument that's used on Stevie Wonder. Stevie Wonder
made the clav famous. Yeah. That's superstitious and stuff like that. That's the clav sound. He also used Mellotron. Mellotron was an early pre-synthesizer attempt to make a keyboard that would do symphonic sounds like strings and stuff.
Mellotron.
Yeah, you hear that on No Quarter, and Paul McCartney's got one, and he does a wonderful video with that. It was a really complicated device with tape loops. They were doing it with tape loops, so you have like a piano keyboard, right? But inside the box, inside the machine, it's 20 inches of a tape loop that's got strings on it, right?
Wow.
So you could get these pseudo string sounds at a time. Now you can just pull up a synthesizer on any MIDI keyboard and do that. But in those days they didn't have that. So there was this thing called the Mellotron, and that became, you hear the Mellotron on No Quarter. I mean, that's the the Mellotron song. I mean, not that they didn't use it before. That's the main Mellotron song for Zeppelin anyway.
Incredible song too.
Yeah, and that's a John Paul Jones thing as well. I mean, a lot of that song is John Paul Jones, as we all learned in Song Always the Same.
The guitar riff in it is like da 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 da. That's also
and in the live version in '73, while you're watching the John Paul Jones music video version of during that song, underneath that, Jimmy Page rips this incredible wah-wah solo on the live version from Song Remains the Same. And, if you go back and if you're watching the video, you may not be like, if you close your eyes and don't watch the video and just listen to the guitar solo there, he's ripping. And it's not on, it's like, he doesn't do that on the album version. This was just like an extended thing where he just took off and with this really rude wah sound, like a cocked wah thing. And it just ripped.